We're going to be going over 4 different databases today. We're going to be going over MongoDB, Postgres, Neo4j, and Redis. I chose these 4, one, partially just because those are the ones I'm familiar with, but also partially because I do believe that those are going to be the 4 most common options in each of these kind of silos that we're going to be looking into. I'm very careful to pin the versions here, so I wrote down these versions because if you take this course in the future and these versions kind of move forward, some of the commands might not work anymore, right? Because they changed the APIs, they improved them, and things like that. So, I mean, you can feel free to try, but just be aware some things might break if you use a future version of these. As of writing, as of today, these are the most current versions, or at least the most current versions I could get on Docker. So, yeah, just be aware of versions. I'm gonna emphasize that again, just be aware of the versions, because this always happens where people come back and say your course is broken. I mean, it kind of, anyway, just make sure you're getting the right version. Okay, so databases are actually quite large. They're pretty big pieces of software. So you have several options on how to download them. I'm gonna be using Docker all day because it makes it very, very easy. And you don't have to understand Docker. I will give you all of the commands that you need to run. It will run on both Windows. It'll run on Mac OS. I'm obviously on Mac OS, but you can see I have my Windows laptop here, so I've tried these as well on Windows. So yeah, I'm going to suggest that you use Docker. So if you haven't downloaded Docker Desktop, I dropped a link in there, but you can also just search for Docker Desktop. Go ahead and go and install Docker Desktop. Looks like something like this. You'll download it. Docker Desktop will work for both Mac OS and for Windows. If you're on Linux, I assume you probably already know how to operate Docker. It's probably a pretty safe assumption. So that, I'm going to say, far and above, easiest thing to do, download Docker Desktop, use that. There are some other options if you don't feel like using Docker. One's going to be using a package manager like Homebrew or Winget or Chocolatey. And you can kind of, brew, install MongoDB. That would work as well. For Linux, you'll be using whatever distro, like apt-get or whatever that you're using. You can go and just download the entire binary yourself for each of these desktops, or for all these databases. So I dropped links in there for those. Some of these actually have desktop clients. Like I know Neo4j has a separate desktop client. I think Postgres does as well. I think Redis does as well. They actually might all have their own individual desktop clients. I have not used them, so use at your own risk. If you're on something like a Chromebook or something like really, really lightweight that would not be able to run a database, something you could do is you could spin up like a cloud version, right? So you could go to like MongoDB Atlas and spin up a cloud version of this. You're gonna run into some difficulties, and I wouldn't know how to advise you on how to do that, but it's a possibility if your computer simply cannot run a database. Lastly, we're going to be running some code samples. Those will be in Node.js. Just be above version 10. You should be fine. I'm not really doing anything too wild here. I think I'm on 12.18.4, which I think is the latest LTS as of like last week or something like that. But again, as long as you're above 12, I think 15 just came out this week. So any one of those should be fine. Cool. And then you can install that via the Node website, or I use NVM, which is a Node version manager. What I would suggest to you. Okay, so that's kind of like all of the various different things. As long as you get Docker Desktop installed, you won't have to do anything else. I'll show you everything on the fly of how to get stuff running through Docker.